Thanks, Paul and Adam, and glad to have Lenny here. And that review article that Lenny just mentioned, that article was really a product of Lenny pushing me to do it, and I'm glad that I did. At first I kind of rushed through it, and then he made me go back and really write it properly. And it's available if you go on ODwire under the clinic and research, you'll find that one of the particular topics is a picture of Lenny there. He looks really cute in that picture. If you click on it, you'll be able to actually be able to download the PDF of that article. And I really think you should, because it will simulate or get you to the next level if you find this productive in a way. There's a second article on that will be coming out. It's been approved by Eye and Contact Lens, which is a more comprehensive review of myopia. It's going to be open access like the other one, so I think they'll be really good in being able to help you add this important area to your practice, because I think that the slowing down of myopia is going to become as important as treating glaucoma or any other entity in our practice. So let's talk about why is this important? Why care about the progression of myopia? Myopia has become a major public health issue, particularly since the prevalence in the United States has increased from 25% in 1971 to approximately 40% at the last undertaking in 2008. And in the Asian countries, some countries have over 80%, approaching almost 90% of the patient population of becoming myopic. And it's not only the numbers that are becoming more myopic, but the fact that the magnitude of myopia is increasing, and with it the complications associated. So if we have 5 billion people in the world now, and there's going to be almost 5 billion people who are affected by myopia in 2050. So it's going to be important because of the fact that it's the sixth leading cause of visual loss. And its associated complications such as retinal detachment, where the incidence of retinal detachment, as we were taught, it doesn't begin at 4 diopters as we were taught, or 6 diopters, but the incidence starts increasing at approximately 1 diopter of myopia. So it doesn't take much myopia to start increasing it, but this worldwide increase in myopia has caused a 4 to 15 times increase in the number of retinal detachments. In addition to that, there's association of increased cataracts with it, but that's probably not as important because we're pretty good in eliminating that problem. One of the things that many clinicians don't really put too much thought about is the relationship of glaucoma and myopia. Not only does it increase the number of patients who have glaucoma, but the optic nerve is affected by the elongation of the eye, making it more susceptible to damage, and therefore we need to be more aggressive in our treatment paradigm in taking care of patients who have glaucoma. And the last one is under the large heading of macular degeneration is myopic maculopathy and macular degeneration, a complication of the stretching of the retina and stretching of the retina to the point where damage and loss of vision with neovascularization causes severe loss of vision. And this is increasing because of both the incidence of myopia is increasing and the amplitude of it is increasing. So we have real reasons to slow this down. Now, there are a variety of methods to slow down myopia, either being optical, which is either contact lenses or Ortho-K. And this particular talk is not suggesting that those don't have a strong place. We're looking and talking about atropine from the standpoint of trying to add it to our armament so that we can provide more effective control of myopia. Now, the whole thing in myopia really began to change with the work of Hubel and Wiesel, where they showed that by changing the visual environment, blurring an eye of a animal that's developing, that it would elongate and become myopic. But it really became a place where we started understanding myopic changes when we realized that by either putting a transilluminator or a lens in front of the eye, that the eye would change or try to become emmetropic to eliminate the optical error imposed by the lens. In this particular diagram, you can see that one half of the eye has a lens in front of it, and we get localized retinal elongation in only one half of the eye. As a matter of fact, if we cut the optic nerve, you still get elongation of the eye. So the changes that occur in the eye are localized to the retina and do not involve seeing or a feedback mechanism. This is extremely important. The last portion of the work done by Earl Smith, who probably is the foremost in changing this, is the fact that what happens when we have a center lens. It should be noted that atropine will stop this process. So if we inject atropine into an eye, the eye will not elongate. And interesting, if you remember in that last picture, the elongation was regionally, suggesting that the change was non-accommodative in nature, and that atropine itself did not respond on an accommodative basis. It also occurs in animals that have striated muscles in it, also showing that we don't need to have smooth muscles to be able to get changes with accommodation or atropine. So atropine will also affect this process even if the optic nerve is cut. Therefore, you remove the feedback of accommodation, and by doing so, it shows that atropine is happening by a non-accommodative mechanism. So, the original use of atropine was clearly on the basis of accommodation, but it just lands up being one of those things that works. Reason why? People really don't know. It's thought that it has some relationship to scleromodeling, blocking the signal of elongation, or dopamine, which is important in the development of emmetropia. So if we're going to use something and slow it down, we just like in glaucoma, we look at risk factors. What are the risk factors of myopia? Well, if we have two parents, there's a pretty good chance of it. And we're going to talk a little bit about axial length because this is a new hot topic. If you look at the axial length of an eye at 5 or 9 years of age, you can predict almost to a 80% certainty the kids who are going to become myopic. Let me say that again. At the age of 5, if you measure their axial length, you can predict the kids who are going to become myopic. And it's well known if the kid is Asian, that there's going to be a greater chance than if they're Caucasian. The amount of close work. And interestingly, this has been challenged, but in some of the challenging, the word has been changed from the amount of close work to the intensity of close work. And the opposite end is the amount of time spent outdoors. The more time a child spends outdoors, the greater the chance they will avoid becoming myopic. It should be pointed out that this particular relationship seems to fall apart once you've developed myopia, meaning that being outside does not slow the progression of myopia. It stops the development. There's also a recent paper that's going to challenge all of those people who are putting blue blocking lenses on kids. If you look at both the animal studies and human studies, it demonstrates that if you eliminate ultraviolet light or violet light, you have an increase in myopia. Let me repeat that. If you use a UV filter, you may be contributing to the development of myopia. So that needs to be looked at. There are about 4 or 5 studies demonstrating that. but it clearly happens in animals, it happens in humans, and it has been looked at in large populations by comparing patients who have blue blocking contact or UV blocking contact lenses or those that don't. Those that have UV filters in it tend to develop myopia and progress a little bit faster. And we know about education in rural development from that standpoint, having a relationship to myopia. So the reason why this becomes important, because we're going to talk a little bit about the kid who's prone to develop myopia. Do we treat that kid or not? So if we're going to get into this seriously, what do we really need? Well, if you're not doing Ortho-K, you really only need a good cycloplegic examination. If you're going to get serious about this, then you got to measure axial length. If you're measuring axial length, you can't use a contact axial length measurement or an A-scan. It's not accurate enough. You have to use either an IOL master or a lens star, and those companies advocate 5 measurements, too much variability. If you really want to follow these patients, you have to start looking at small changes in axial length or when of 0.04 millimeters, or which is equivalent to 0.125 diopters. So that's about 1/10 of a diopter. So if I'm measuring 1/10 of a diopter and I can see changes and I know that they're real, and I'm going to start considering some form of change in my protocol of treatment. And when we get into atropine, that may be the concentration of atropine. This is a study that was reported in 2017. They looked at about 4,000 kids, and they plotted out axial length and showed that if the longer your axial length at ages 5 years of age, the greater the chances of myopia. And interestingly, females and males do not have the same axial length. One of the problems that we've ensued in looking at this is the realization that axial length, even in emmetropic children, increases over time, which means that the lens needs to accommodate the changes to maintain emmetropia. But it's going to be important to look at these numbers because it's going to give us predictions. It's going to grow this area just like glaucoma started to grow. So the takeaway on this is, even though we have some development of elongation, the key is where do they fall in the very beginning. And if they're going a little bit faster, the progression rates are going to be a little bit higher. So axial length, it's not where you're going to start, but it's the place where you're going to land up if you're going to build a bigger practice. So there are a whole group of things that might slow down myopia. And we're going to specifically talk about only atropine, not because it's the only valid one. And the use of atropine to slow myopia goes back to the 1800s. Atropine was demonstrated to slow it all the way back at that time. But it wasn't very popular because there were only bifocal lenses and there were no transition lenses. So the kids who were put on this type of treatment were very symptomatic. It started changing in the 1970s with the development of both transition lenses and progressive lenses, so that we could actually handle the problems of light sensitivity and the reason why most people drop out. And the early results were pretty good. The best one being this trial that was done by Bedrossan using atropine only in one eye. And they didn't give the patients the bifocal purposely for the reason that they didn't want to taint their results of there being an accommodative basis for this. Look at the bottom. The treated eyes actually became less myopic. Let me repeat that. The treated eyes reduced their amount of myopia in year 1. And the control eyes landed up to progressing at a 0.9 diopters a year, a tremendous reduction in progression of myopia. So the concept is not new. It's an old one from that standpoint. Come on. This is just a table of studies that were done from 1973 on. They weren't controlled, but if you look at the number of patients in there, one study had 592, another one 282, some for 3 years, some for 2 years, some for 4 years, a couple that went on for 9 years. Number one, they showed that the atropine reduction was about 80%, and number two, there was no finding discussion of rebound. Okay, let me repeat that. There was no statement of rebound, which people are talking about all of the time. So it's true that none of these were controlled, but even the ATOM 1 and 2 that we're gonna talk about, they weren't perfectly controlled either. In 2001, atropine was used 1 time a week in the Caucasian population. Mean rate of progression, 0.8 diopters in 700 kids. Pretty impressive results with the utilization in once a week. It also seems to work on high myopes, not only low myopes. So atropine 1% is very effective in slowing myopia across the board. And I really got involved in this in around 2000 when I had a patient who was about 5 years of age and had a retinal detachment. And he was a 6 diopter myope. And the parents said to me, is there anything that you can do for my child to reduce the chances of the other eye having a retinal detachment? And after consultation with a fellow retinal person that I knew, we came to the conclusion that it would make sense to place this child on atropine 1% to try to slow the progression, since they were very young, very progressive, and had already demonstrated a retinal detachment. And that kid was started at the age, in the year 2000. He was shifted over when he was about 16, 18 years of age to lower percentage, and happily has maintained a good vision in that eye without any major progression. But the big thing in looking at atropine occurred in 2006 with a large study called the ATOM 1 study. The ATOM 1 study had over 400 children between the ages of 6 and 12. Moderate myopia, and one eye was chosen for treatment, and the other eye received placebo, and there were also half of the kids didn't get any one of the drops. All children were given photochromic progressive lenses on that, so that we could monitor their progression and use themselves as a control. It was clear after year 1 and 2 that there was almost no real change. There was a minimum change in refractive error per year, which was 0.28 diopters, compared to the placebo, which was a 1 1/4 diopters. This was a big change. More importantly, look at what happened with axial length. The eyeballs actually got shorter, okay? So there was a reversal of myopia. Not a big amount. That correlates to about 0.05 diopters, but it's real. I mean, when you took it across boards. So at least there was no major progression on it. So this really kind of changed the beginning treatment. In the Asian countries that were very concerned, particularly Taiwan and Singapore, they started putting all of their kids on atropine 1%. So it's very interesting. The utilization of treatment is country dependent. If you go to China, it's Ortho-K. If you go to Taiwan and Singapore, it is atropine. And if you look at the progression of less than a half diopter, over 70% of the atropine 1% kids had no progression, while that was less than 20% in the children that were in the control. So clearly, atropine 1% slowed the progression down by approximately 77%. That's a big number, particularly when you take it over a period of time. It has a major reduction in the incidence of elongation associated with retinal detachments, etc. The key, though, is the number of people who had symptoms. And if you look at this, okay, it's really pretty small. Small percentage of them had allergic reactions. Glare was not that big. Blurred vision was not that big. And this has been my experience. Your first thought is that when you use Atropine 1%, the children will not tolerate it. That is false. The dropout rate for Atropine 1% is about 20%. The dropout rate for Ortho-K is about 20%. The dropout rate for contact lenses is 20%. It's no higher than any of the other treatment modalities. You hear people who get on a podium, particularly who come from an academic world and haven't really been out there treating these kids, turn around and talk about sensitivity to light, glare, and all kinds of problems. I would probably challenge any one of those people how many times they've used Atropine 1%. I have over 100 kids who've been on it for a long period of time, and have had no real adverse effects, have no problems of using it, even in bright areas like Florida. So most of the statements of glare, sensitivity, they're not there, particularly since these children are wearing photochromic lenses, which reduce these symptoms dramatically from that standpoint. So the tolerance is quite good. And when I talk to these kids and I say to them, any problem with this? The answer is no. So now we know that 1%'s been used. It was turned away by many people in the United States on the basis of theoretical complications, even though they weren't really there. But everything got more inspiring as we started hearing more studies that dealt with lowering the concentration with the effect that it wouldn't be as bad. By the way, all of you have used cycloplegics like Cyclogel, and you know that the eye does not dilate nearly as much as it does with Midriasil. That's the same thing with Atropine. Atropine's dilation is very similar or less than Cyclogel. So you don't get the full dilation that you get with Midriasil with it. So the first study that looked at this compared Atropine 0.5, 0.25%, 0.1, and as you can see clearly that as you decrease the concentration, the number of kids that progressed increased. So Shin's report was, yes, you can use lower concentrations, but you are going to get more kids that are falling through the cracks and who seem to be progressing in their myopia. However, it is clear that if you do nothing, only 8% do not progress. And even at low dosages, the majority, 42% didn't progress, which is not bad, okay? And as a matter of fact, whenever I talk or ask anyone, what is the progression rate that you will feel comfortable if you're treating? Meaning, if I slow it down by 10%, will you go forward with the treatment? Most people say no. It's not until you get around 50% that the majority in an audience will turn around and say, hey, I'm doing something positive and we need to slow, we should do that if we can get a 50% success rate. So this shows the amount of dioptric changes per year, control of one diopter, and it goes down steadily. You get a pretty good bang for your buck, even at 0.1% atropine. Look at 0.5. It's 0.04, fairly similar to 1% atropine. So clinically speaking, 0.5% and 1% are equivalent. No need to substitute it, because Atropine 1% is commercially available, where 0.5% is not. This really depicts the relationship in that study of concentration versus effectivity. And the progression rate is under a quarter it really hits home when you're at 0.5% and drops back off. So people turn around and say, yeah, I think we can start dropping the concentration. We'll get a lot less effects, but you can't drop it too much. And using 0.05% with patients who were had parents treated with myopia, it's much slower at that particular level. And this one I thought is a very interesting one because the question, as we started off, always comes up: what do I do with the child who at age 3 is +2, at 4 +1, and at 5 +50, and they have 2 parents who are myopic, and have some of the other risk factors? Do we treat them? Do we keep them from becoming myopic? In talking to most parents, they want to do that. There are many parents, let me not say most, because it probably depends on where you live. In New York, where there's a high myopic population, high group of people who are very educated, they want to do something to slow the myopia of their children, and they want to try to keep their kids myopic. This study showed with using atropine 0.025% that these children had no symptoms, they had minimal or no accommodative changes, no real pupillary dilation, and the majority of them did not become myopic with the use. So there's some real thought, and we got to start thinking about it. If they have high enough risk factors, is that so much different than glaucoma treatment? If you have some cupping, have family history of glaucoma, your pressures are high, do we treat some of these patients to make sure they don't convert? I believe we should, or we do. So there is a real similar analogy in the consideration of treatment and the problems of not having total agreement within the community. I thought this was a very interesting study where they varied the atropine on the basis of the season. They did it on the basis of 2 thoughts. The first one, myopia tends to increase faster during the winter than the summer. And the second one is that during the summer, there's more sunlight, more sensitivity to light, and therefore it might be prudent to decrease the concentration of the drops that are used. And they demonstrated this worked just as well as 0.5 by being able to seasonally vary the prescription. I do this every once in a while, and it obviously is important in the kids that I have on a higher concentration when they go to camp during the summer, where we try to lower the concentration so that they'll be more comfortable. The whole thing really changed, though, with the study of ATOM 2. This study, which was first published in 2011, changed the whole thinking of concentrations, of how we should be using it to slow the progression of myopia. And it was a large study of 400 kids. It should be noted they did not have a control. They used the control data from ATOM 1. There's an assumption, therefore, that this is a controlled study and you can really compare it. You may have a little bit of a problem. They may not have been from the same background, ages, etc. There may have been diversification. But in any case, they divided into 3 phases. In phase 1, they used the treatment of various concentrations for 2 years. Phase 2, they discontinued treatment. In phase 3, those that progressed, they put them back on it. We'll go into a little bit more detail on that particular basis. The results do show that there is a change in the progression or the ability to control myopia with concentration. However, one of the things that is highlighted is the very good effect of atropine 0.01 as compared to a placebo, where in atropine 0.01, there was an increase of a half diopter a year, 0.49. And with the control, there was an increase in myopia by about a diopter and a quarter. So to their surprise, actually in the O2 study, the reason why they didn't have a control is because they thought the atropine 0.01 would be a control. So they were surprised at the results, but it slowed it down more than they thought. But please note the data in this particular one. It's concentration related. The higher the concentration, the greater the effect of slowing it down. But obviously, the lower the concentration, the less side effects on accommodation and pupil size, making it something that everyone wants. And therefore, it come to the conclusion by just comparing the initial data of 2 years that atropine 1% is the gold standard, 0.5 is effective, and as you go down in prescription, the effectivity decreases. Well, here's where things started becoming even a little bit more interesting. The second study they talked about is what happens when you stop the use of atropine. And I want to make a couple points right off the bat. We learned a lot from this, but this isn't what you do in clinical practice. You don't stop a drug. You don't stop a steroid cold turkey when you have uveitis. You don't stop it when you have atropine. You're maintaining some type of effect, and you're doing this during the period of time that these kids have axial elongation, which means you're going to do something at least until age 18. After that particular point, there might be some type of question. So in this study, they, after 2 years, they stopped the progression. They stopped the use of atropine. And one of the things that they did find is that there was a rebound increase in the refraction, cycloplegic refraction, and in axial length. However, we really need to, we will look at this data a little bit more carefully, because when you look at it in a graph like this, it's very hard to be able to see. So let's start looking at these 3 phases. As we said, 2 years of treatment, 1 year of washout, and then the treatment after that particular point. Well, if you notice on the left-hand side, we're talking about spherical equivalent. Notice what happens with atropine in the first year. You have actually a reduction in the myopia. At the end of 2 years, there's no question, atropine 1% is the winner. Clearly, 0.01% does better than you would think. And when you you remove the treatment, you get rebound from all of them, but most of all from atropine 1%. Okay. However, this is spherical information, and we need to look and see what happens when we look at axial length. Because the major reason why I'm treating these particular kids is because I'm trying to slow axial length. I'm really not as concerned about refractions. So this is the combined information that was published in from the ATOM 1 and 2 studies, combining it. And the suggestion is that the kids that are using 0.01 after the withdrawal phase may be better. But let's take a little bit of a closer look at that. And what I really want to do is look at axial length measurements. This is a graph of axial length, and it's a little bit hard to see because it's everything clusters in that 24-month period of time, and the rebound isn't nearly as great as it is with the refraction. So there's much less rebound. Using axial length, atropine 1% is the winner on it. That's the bottom line. Look at it. None of the other ones are even close to it. So there's really a dichotomy or a separation between the refractive cycloplegic information and axial length. And axial length is clearly the winner. So I took the data published by the ATOM 1 study, and I replotted it because it looks pretty self-evident. If you look at the top portion where you have yellow bars, those are the axial length measurements of change that occur with placebo, atropine 0.01, 1%, 0.5, and atropine 1%. And as you can see in that top yellow area, that it is concentration related even in that study. And the higher the concentration, the less the elongation of the eye. When you look at it, atropine 1% only showed after 2 years 0.02 millimeters of axial length growth. The bottom portion of the graph is the cycloplegic data, and the cycloplegic data converted from the axial length data, so that you can see right off the bat that there's clearly a relationship to concentration, which is not really concluded from people who read just the abstract of the Atom 2. You got to look at the data. You can't just read the abstract, because that's what the authors want to tell you, not necessarily what the data wants to tell you. So there's no question that concentration is the key. Now, I just got back from ARVO, and at ARVO, which was a great place in Hawaii, there was a study of 422 kids between the ages of 4 and 12. They were placed on atropine 0.05, 0.025, and 0.01 because they wanted to see what happens with the lower concentration. Can we find an optimal amount on that? And their data is really clear. It really puts into real question the conclusions of that Atom 2 study. You can see right off the bat that the refractive changes which is the grayish blue line, is dependent upon the concentration of atropine. The stronger the concentration, the slower the progression. And the same thing is true when we look at axial length. Because of the difference in scales, it looks like axial length is changing at a different rate. It really isn't. It's happening proportionally with the changes in refraction. So this new data supports the findings that I've been seeing. The second thing that I just want to point out is my clinical findings, and in addition to that, people I've talked to, because one of the people who came up to me is the people who did that study with axial length. They were from the Netherlands. They basically abandoned a lot of the slow dosages, and they reverted back to higher dosages of atropine. So with this shift, I was, because we did some work and we demonstrated that 0.02% is the lowest dosage that you can use without any side effects. We made a switch from 1% and we started using 0.02 and found that it's pretty good, but it's not nearly as effective as 1%. But there's a population, and we'll discuss it, that it's very effective on. On the other hand, when I made the movement, since everyone was going to 0.01 because of the Atom 2 study, I personally found a good percentage of my patients who progressed in their myopia. I think that as time goes on, we're going to find that lower concentrations are the way we should start, but 0.01 is not going to be the one. It's going to be 0.02, and you're going to have to watch these kids every 3, 4, 6 months to depending on their progression, and alter their concentration based upon their response. Not very much different than the glaucoma paradigm. The assumption that everyone's going to respond, or that we can predict who the kids are, at least at this particular point, it's not there. We do need to look at the variables, who escapes, who responds from that particular portion. But it's clear that that at these different intervals, that the refraction changes are related to concentration. There is some interesting stuff that did come out of that phase 2, which is that 50% of the kids who were stopped during that withdrawal period did not progress afterwards for the next year. So it seemed that atropine does, in the right kid, have a permanent stopping signal. The problem is you don't know which kids it is. So there is some thought that we can go on to these myopia treatments for a period of time, recommendation coming out around 5 years, and then stop them, measure them, see if there's progression, and if they're progressing, resume their atropine. So when parents ask me, how long do we have to be on this? I kind of tell them that we can reassess their progression at ages 16 or 18 years of age and make a determination if they're one of those kids who've slowed or stopped the progression. And this seems to be age related. That's not a surprise. The older the kid, the older the child, the greater the chance that they did not need retreatment. Interestingly, the lower the dosage, the less chance of retreatment. That one I find a little bit of a surprise. But again, some of this may be related to the concept of like steroids. You need to taper them off. If you have people on a high concentration of steroids and you really go cold turkey, you get a real rebound uveitis. Same mechanism. In one, you stop the body's ability to fight inflammation, and the other one, you stop the ability of the eye to regulate its axial length by some type of factor other than the central length of their eyeball. So the takeaway of the rebound thing should be that there may be children that we can stop. We need to titrate it, but I do not believe that the conclusions drawn by the ATOM 2 are appropriate, and that that atropine 0.01 is more effective than higher concentrations. But it definitely has a face. It has a place in slowing the very mild kids who are progressing, kids who are young and beginning to become myopic. But if you have a kid who's 4 years of age and 4 diopters of myopia, and their parents are -6, and you put them on atropine 0.01 or 0.02, it's not going to slow that progression enough. You need to go with the big guns. You need to pull out atropine 1%. And those kids accept it well. If you put them on that, they don't know anything better. You put them on the drops, and I have the parents put the drops in when they're sleeping, and it's tolerated quite well with progressive glasses and transitional types of glasses. So you can go up. You can do this either way. You can start low concentration and go up, or you can start a higher concentration and go down. The key, if you're really going to get serious about it, is axial length measurements to determine that the progressive order of that. So, anyways, you need to keep them on for at least 2 years. And one of the things to keep in mind that in all of the treatments, from bifocals to Ortho-K, the treatment response is greatest in year 1. So any study that is done for 1 year may not give us the true indication of its power of effectivity because it does a better job in the first year. So a second thing, just remember with the rebound studies, I don't take those kids off, even if I'm using atropine 1%. We bring them down. They usually are atropine 1% kids that are very young. We end up keeping them on until around 8, 9 years of age. And at that point, most of them want to get into contact lenses. We go to Ortho-K, or we use a multifocal lens like Natural View that has the right optics to slow the progression of myopia down. So we really haven't seen this washout type of period. So the big thing now is meta-analysis. In meta-analysis, you can lie with meta-analysis just like you can lie with statistics. And this came out in the summer of 2017, picked up by APOS. APOS is the American Physicians of Ophthalmology and Surgery. And APOS took this, which was a meta-analysis of all of the concentrations, which falsely concluded that there was just as good of a success with high dosages and with low dosages. There's a major flaw in this study, which is they combine dosages, meaning they combine 0.01, 0.2, 0.1, 0.25, and then talked about the higher dosages when we got up to 0.5 and 1%. You can't do that. If you're going to look at a study on concentration, you've got to look at what happens with concentration. You can't group all of those patients together. So there's a major, major problem with this. The second problem with this one used refractive error. They did not use axial length. And as I mentioned before, there's clear indications in every study that axial length varies. With this, APOS has turned around and advised their members to use atropine 0.01% on children who are progressing myopia. It is my understanding from my pediatric ophthalmological friends that the majority of ophthalmologists in the last 6 months have begun to use atropine 0.01 in any child who's in progressive myopia. Remember, they like this. They see a kid, they're progressing, they turn to the parent and they say, we have a drop that's going to slow the progression of myopia. Here, go get this filled. It's easy. It doesn't change their style or their life. So hopefully in optometry, we'll take a much more responsible look at this, not advocating just atropine, mixing it with multifocal soft lenses and Ortho-K appropriately prescribing this. Atropine is so popular in some countries and not in the other. It's been advocated since the year 2000 in Taiwan. The National Health Institute covers it, and the majority of children are on atropine. They started on 1% atropine, but today now most of them are using 0.1, which is much lower dose than 2002. Where in the U.S. everyone's using 0.01 because of the Atom 2. It's interesting that in China, which has 1.2 billion people, I think, or 1.4, the treatment of choice right now is Ortho-K. They do not use atropine at all. Okay, so it seems like it's country dependent, related to the research that's been done in that particular one. And if we look at that number in Taiwan, the number of kids who are on atropine, it's just increasing. They start slowing it down as myopia slows down after the age of 14. But look at that number. Over 60% of the kids are on atropine. And the dosage has been changing over time, but the number of kids has been increasing. So there's less use of 1% atropine. That's been dropping. That's the green line. And the lower doses have been increasing. Note that there is no 0.01 or anything lower than that. And that's because that's what is on their formulary. And they can get it free of charge from their national health. So there's really a real movement towards that of using atropine. And as I mentioned before, there's a place for 1% atropine. There's a place for lower concentrations atropine. And a good meta-analysis clearly shows that. When we look at that, you'll see it says ATRH, that's high concentration atropine, 1% or 0.5. And when you drop to lower percentages of atropine, two things happen. Its effectivity drops and the variance increases. You see how that bar gets a little bit wider? Wider because there's more variance. Some kids do quite well on it, but a lot more kids don't do well on it. They have greater variance on it. Interestingly, one of the things that this shows up is if you undercorrect, that's the bottom one, undercorrection, single vision glasses, you actually have more progression than if you use a single vision. So this intervention on one side is the spherical one, the other side is axial length. And again, axial length differences are a little bit stronger than what you see in refraction. So there's no question that the higher the doses, the greater the impact or the effect of atropine. So how does it work? Well, we really don't know. It's believed that it indirectly has some effect on the retina and the sclera. There's been thoughts about cross-linking on it, that there's thoughts of it blocking the signal, changing the amount of dopamine. Key thing, though, it does work. And we just need to be aware of its effects. And this was a kid, just as an example, the child was 6.5 diopters of myopia. They'd been on atropine 1% initially. When they got older, they started developing symptoms. They'd been very well controlled. They went on 0.02. 6 months later, they increased their myopia to 7.25. I said, oh my God, you know what? Okay, we better go back to the atropine 1%. Put the kid back on atropine 1%, cycloplegic refraction returned to minus 650. So this is a perfect case of demonstrating that the refractive error is a little bit problematic because it's not just axial length, but the effect of the lens is clearly important in determining refractive error. And it may be contributing to some of the variance that we have when we're measuring this. So this is a case of false rebound. Really did not happen from the use of atropine. So the thing that we gather out of this is, at least from my point of view, is that we should be starting the more slowly developing myopic kids, older kids, on low doses of atropine, about 0.02%. I am not using atropine 0.01, except to try to keep the children from becoming myopic. The real indication of all these studies is it's dosage dependent. If you are at a low dose and it's not working, pick it up, keep adding it, okay? And there are some kids who are on the gold standard of atropine 1%, and it won't work and nothing else will work, but the majority it will. The other thing to keep in mind is that you can add multifocal Ortho-K lenses, and it will have an impact of doing that. So we need to find out the amount of period of time, what the optimal concentrations on it. And as we mentioned before, we can use 0.02 from a study that we did back in 2013. That's pretty effective in slowing the progression of myopia down. And how does this compare to Ortho-K? Well, there was one study that was done. It seems like it will slow it down the same. Atropine 0.125, not 0.01, is almost equivalent to Ortho-K in controlling myopia. So if you're at a moderate level, they're pretty well equivalent. And I'm in Manhattan, and in Manhattan, that's part of the way I make my determination of what I'm going to use, atropine versus Ortho-K or soft lenses. It's driven by the kid. The kid who likes their glasses, happy with their glasses, they go on atropine. The kid who says, I don't want contact lenses, they go on atropine. The child who can't get a contact lens in, The parent who's scared of sleeping with a lens like Ortho-K but doesn't want to put contact lenses in, they go to Atropine. The kid who's very athletic and the parents have perfect control, those kids land up as being an Ortho-K kid. And one of the other takeaways from one of the studies is that Atropine seems to slow myopic progression more in Asian children than Caucasian children by meta-analysis. So you'll get a little bit bang for your buck. But this is an important graph which asks the question, okay, so I'm on my low dosage of Atropine and it's not working. What happens if I add Ortho-K? Or I'm using Ortho-K and it's not working properly. What happens if I add Atropine? In either one of those two cases, the addition of the other one slows the progression much more. So they're additive. So if you're doing Ortho-K or using a multifocal lens to slow the progression of myopia, it's not a bad idea if you're not getting what you want to add Atropine or 0.01% or more if need be. So what are our guidelines after this? Atropine 1% should be used for the very young progressive myopes with a strong family. If other dosages aren't working, you can go all the way up to it. Start your first beginning myopes off with the lower dosage ones, particularly 0.02. It can be additive to Ortho-K. If the child is progressing, then go up from 0.02 to go up double it to 0.04. If that's not working, go to 0.1, then to 0.2, go to 0.4 on that. Keep doubling the concentration if you're not getting an effectivity. As I mentioned, I really let the child make the determination of what treatment we're going to do. Consider seasonal treatment, particularly if the child is going to camp. And this is the beginning. We should be stopping the beginning of myopia. And Atropine should be in our armament. And if you guys don't get involved in doing this area, in my opinion, is going to be taken away by ophthalmology. Because ophthalmology is going to learn fairly soon. 0.01 doesn't work. They're going to go up that ladder, and then they're going to start seeing the contact lens studies. They're not going to become advocates, in my opinion, of Ortho-K. Too many of the corneal guys have a negative, an adverse opinion of Ortho-K because of the rare corneal complications that have occurred. And many of you know that Ortho-K had a problem in China all the way back around 2000, which has not been repeated. But in the United States, even in the United States, there have been some serious infections, and those have usually happened because of poor hygiene. Hopefully that this introduction into Atropine will stimulate you, get you thinking that you should be involved in this particular area, and get you to do it. And just remember, low concentrations of Atropine are not commercially available. You have to find a formulary, a compounding agent that will make it up for you. And you have the choice of either either preserved or non-preserved. I generally go to the preserved Atropine. So just start doing it. Thank you.
Wow.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Jeff. This was an incredibly practical and cutting-edge lecture. This is a first for us, right?
Sure.
So great. So Len, are you still there?
Sure
He
am.
fell asleep.
Wake
I
up.
was on the edge.
Lenny, wake up.
So before we get into any questions from anyone out in the audience, I just was curious, Len, what were your impressions?
Very good. Obviously, I was familiar with a lot of Jeff's material because of the article that we mentioned in our journal. But Jeff, I wanted to ask you, when you use 1%, which is clearly the most effective, how frequently do you instill it? Do you have the parent put it in daily, twice a week? How do you manage that in your practice?
It's interesting. I presented to you, there is one paper that was done on Caucasians that showed it to be almost as effective putting it in nightly. However, my own clinical experience is that once you have a treatment that you do once a week on a drop formation, it doesn't happen. They miss the week. They forget that they're supposed to put it in on Sunday, and they just don't do it. And the second point is that most of the studies were done with using the drops every night. We do know that atropine has a very long effect, up to 14 days, but we don't really know when it gets into the receptor sites, the difference between once a day and once a week. So I stay with once a week, but I tell the parents if they miss a day, don't do anything.
And when you use the dilute concentrations, does that also hold for once a week, or are you using it more frequently?
No, I mean, no, every night, same thing. Every night, not once a week.
Oh, okay, so you're using every night, whether it's 1% or 0.02%.
I believe that patients need a habit of putting it in. And I know in using atropine for amblyopia and putting it in twice a week, you start, the non-compliance begins at that particular point. They forget. Better, know, if you're putting something in every day, they're doing it. They miss a couple of days, who cares?
I have a question about eye color. Does it make a difference if it's a blue-eyed kid versus a brown-eyed kid?
Generally, yes, but there are always exceptions. It's like dilating the eyes with anything else. Blue-eyed children are definitely more sensitive.
Right. And we got a question here from the audience. We have many questions, actually, so I'll start in with one of them for you. Can you speak to the systemic complications? So atropine obviously has cardiac effects and it also has GI effects in some folks. Have you seen anything like that, especially at the higher concentrations?
The answer is after the age of 7, it's not reported. It was measured in a number of studies, not a problem at all. And as a matter of fact, everyone starts talking about long-term and everything else. The most sensitive measure on retinal function is an ERG. And the ERG data shows that there is no effect from long-term use of atropine. And everyone, you have to remember that atropine in the very beginning of the last century was a major drug that was used for uveitis. And it was, home atropine and atropine were the only drugs that were around. And they were used in people with chronic uveitis for 20, 30 years with no reported effect from it. So it's probably one of the safest drugs and one of the most studied drugs that we have, because there aren't many things that have been around since the 1800s.
Interesting question here. In your own practice, what would you say for follow-up frequency for a patient that you put on atropine? How often do you have them come back?
So I've kind of changed my paradigm with it. And this is going to be how serious you're going to get involved with myopia control. Because if you don't have the measuring stick, there's no sense having them back often. So if you're using refraction as the mechanism and you get someone who's progressing at a diopter a year, having them back every 6 months is okay. But if you're getting to the point where you really want to manage this stuff, then you almost need, if you're going to become serious, an IOL master. Buy it used. They're on the market. And measure axial length, because then you can go to 3 months, and if you see a tenth of a diopter equivalent change, which is 0.04 millimeters, you can change the concentration. So it's almost like, if you go, they're not progressing, they're doing okay, no problem following them if you don't have axial length measurements. But if I get, the thing that has built up my myopia control practice, I've been very fortunate, is 2 pediatric ophthalmologists who have come over the years to believe in this, and they just send me a bunch of patients. And where they started, clearly, it's like anything else. Like, who were the first LASIK patients? Patients who had -12. Who were the first patients they sent me? Patients who were -4 and 4 years of age and who were progressing a diopter and a half a year. So that's why we have so much experience with atropine 1%. That's probably not typical to the average OD. If you're the older age group, you just have to look at the progression rate. The progression rate is rapid, then you got to see these kids every 3 months. If it slows down and you demonstrate it slows down, then you can start, changing it. So the very progressive kid, we see 3 months, nothing happens. Then we go to 4, then we go to 6, and after 2 years, if they're not really progressing, we go yearly.
Right. So, we have a lot of instrument junkies here on ODwire, and someone was asking, can you use, and again, this is not sponsored by any company, so we can talk about whatever we want here, which is fantastic. The DGH ScanMate. So again, I'm unfamiliar with a lot of these things for measuring axial length. Can you speak to these other instruments, and if people do want to get involved, what they can do if they want to buy these other instruments?
I've had 2 contact types of A scans. Mm-hmm. There are 2 major problems with them. The measurements are very variable, and the second problem with them is they break. And I moved away from that. One of the other problems with that is that you can't get down to measurements of 0.01 diopters on any of the contact ones. So you ask, why were the ophthalmologists buying them beforehand? Because you got to remember, when you're doing an IOL, it's a half diopter difference at the steps they come in. So they don't really need very accurate axial length measurements. But if you're going to do myopia control, you do.
Right. So question here, what's the longest amount of time you'd consider keeping a kid on atropine?
I've had kids on atropine from 4 years of age up to 20. And then we start taking them off at that point and see what happens. Those were the very progressive, I started with atropine back in 2000, 2001. So we have some kids who have really been on it for a long period of time.
And let's see, question here, and this is like, I don't know, this almost strikes me as an economic question, but if Ortho-K works just as well, or they works in combination with atropine, why wouldn't you just use both at the same time?
You never want to do more than you need to do in anything. There is always the concept of risk against benefit. So, again, I met an awful lot of people who say, I only do Ortho-K, I don't do any atropine. That would not fly in New York. I mean, I've got patients who don't want to do Ortho-K. They've been told by an ophthalmologist, they've been told by a pediatrician. They read something when they went on the web that Ortho-K. The kid doesn't want a contact lens. I can't put a contact lens on a kid who doesn't want it. I've got to have that kid on my side. So we very much, the first thing I do is I look at the kid who's wearing glasses and I say, what do you think about your glasses? Do you like them? When they smile and they tell me they like their glasses, and then I mention contact lenses and they shake their head no, I'm not going to Ortho-K or a multifocal contact lens. My experience is that ain't happening.
One other question I would have for you, how can you determine when a treatment failure is sort of underway? Like, let's say they do come back at 3 months. When you take that next step up in dose, how far do you go for a patient? Do you just take one step up in concentration, or do you start to really amp it up if someone's progressing?
Kind of how much are they progressing? If they're progressing just a mild amount, if I'm seeing them in 3 months, but I know if I draw a graph, it's going to be a diopter in a year, then I'm going to probably after 3 months double that concentration. If on the other hand, they come in and they've gone up 3/4 in a very short period of time, I'm going to skip a couple of steps. It's almost the same concept. What do you do when you have a patient with glaucoma? If you put them on a drop and their pressure isn't being controlled, you become more aggressive. It's the same paradigm. You're trying to use the lowest concentration or the least, that you can use to get the effect that you want to get on that.
So interesting question here. So philosophically, for people who have never done any sort of myopia control before, do you sort of feel that this is something that a general optometrist can do safely and effectively in their office, even if they've never done it before?
I think if they don't jump in and do it, goodbye. And I think that what they better do is they better go and read and learn about it. In the same way, I don't, well, can a general optometrist do glaucoma? Of course they can, but they better learn and be as good as an ophthalmologist on glaucoma, because why should a patient come to you if you're not providing at least equivalent care? And in doing that, you got to learn it and become a real expert on it. Not a glaucoma specialist, but you've got to know the complications and where you're going and what you're doing, what the goals are. I think
Right.
the same thing is true here, but I think we need as a profession to do that. As I mentioned, I think ophthalmology is doing it in the way that I would criticize optometrists are doing it. They're just prescribing 0.01. They have no idea of what they're doing. I think it's much more of a science, and it's going to grow. Animal studies going, human studies are going. This is a hot topic, and it's going to get hotter.
Well, I think the reason the question was motivated just by looking at the phrasing of it is that you're starting to see these freestanding centers, right, that just handle myopia control. And I guess
if they want to do that, everyone knows, some people may know there's tree houses around, and they've created an expert model, and they want to co-manage. You don't want to do it. You're not comfortable in doing it. You don't want to learn it. Fine. What I don't think you should do is turn around when the patient turns around and says, is there anything you can do about the progression of myopia, and say no. I think you're fraudulent to your patients. I think the pendulum has turned. I think you have an obligation, morally and possibly even legally. I got beat up with this a while ago, and I will still make this statement. What happens if you have a child that comes into your office at age 4, and the kid is a -2, and at age 12, he's a -10, and at age 13, he has a retinal detachment? And you never mentioned that there was anything that could be done to slow it down. Are you legally liable? Is there malpractice in that? Were you moral to that patient? I think those are some, I'm not sure. A good lawyer, I think, would kill you on it, okay? They would start on the thing. You never brought it up to the parent. You never gave them what the literature was. Doesn't make any difference if you didn't think the literature was good enough. You didn't expose or educate your patient properly. And maybe if this kid had that drop and been aggressively treated, they wouldn't have become a -14 and their retina wouldn't have fallen off. So, when I brought that up once in optometric weekly, he said, "Oh, you think it's going to be the standard of care?" Yeah, I thought it back then. I think it now. I might have been a little early. That it's going to change.
Yep. And I guess you've been in academia for quite a while. What are the schools doing these days? Are they actually teaching this as part of their standard course for kids who are on the way out?
A number of schools now have myopia clinics. I know University of Houston does. I know Ohio State does. I know Berkeley does. I know SUNY's just built one. So I don't know about the other ones. It is interesting. Most of those schools are the same place that have some researchers doing it. So there's some added portion. But I'll take it in the next one. You remember I was talking to you before. Columbia University has been increasing their optometric program of hiring optometrists and really getting them involved, but at high levels, because they believe there's going to be a shortage of ophthalmologists, and optometry has to add to this. So the 2 optometrists in there have contacted me, because you know what they have to do? They want to put in a myopia clinic. So Columbia University is going to put it in. I mentioned to you that Manhattan Eye and Ear, I'm going to probably be lecturing there and doing grand rounds there. Did grand rounds at Montefiore. There's been more interest almost in the ophthalmological groups than there are in the optometric ones. When I lectured at SUNY the other night, there were 30 people in there. When we did a lecture to the pediatric ophthalmologists in New York, and remember, they're a relatively anti-optometric group, I had 40 people. So there's clearly more interest. They're going to go in that direction. We better be there, in my opinion.
Wow.
Okay,
all right.
wow.
Well, so Jeff, thanks for this. And I guess we're almost out of time. But Len, do you have any parting thoughts for us as well?
Yeah, perhaps. Jeff, do you consider having parents sign a waiver because this is an off-label use for children?
You know, I do it and we do it and we don't do it. So if it's on our thing, it doesn't get done all the time. It's interesting, the paranoia of optometrists versus ophthalmologists,
Right.
because they turn
So,
around and say, why do you have to do that? Almost everything I do is off label. I don't make parents sign everything that's off label. I have them be signing all the time. They say the Atropine's been around 100 years. If you have studies and things to support it, and that's what people are doing and moving that, what do I need to do that for?
so your advice to colleagues today is don't worry about it. Don't worry about a waiver.
You asked the question what I'm doing. They need to make their own determination. But I'm telling you how ophthalmology is looked at it. They're not.
So as of today, you're no longer doing it?
I haven't signed. Most of them have not signed a waiver, and I'm not worried about it.
And last comment, I suppose the argument for home atropine, if it were as effective as 1% atropine, is that it's commercially available, whereas compounding, it's not that easy to get a hold of, and it's certainly more expensive.
But you're talking about lower doses. Home atropine has the same psychoplegic and dilation effect as atropine.
So no advantage to home atropine in terms of effect versus 1% atropine.
Correct. Right.
Got it.
Great.
Oh, good.
All right. Well, this was definitely a lively hour here. This is fantastic.
The conversation will continue, though.
The conversation is definitely going to continue online. So even though we had hundreds of people for this thing, we're going to have this up on ODwire as in our archives, in our video archives, and I'm sure this is where we're going to get
thousands.
Yeah, thousands of people are going to be watching this over the next several weeks or months. So hopefully the conversation will continue online, and Jeff and Len, you guys can come back and help stoke it along, because this is definitely, I think, going to be a growth industry. So thanks so much for helping us with this tonight.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Papa Farkas.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for coming, and I guess we'll see you all online.
Okay, thanks.
Have a good night.